Thanks for talking to me, Alex.
Well, thanks for interviewing me.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with the firefly picture set that you basically just did last month.
Yeah.
I was talking to Joe, your wife, about them, and I was saying how it's kind of interesting. You can see sort of that evolution of Alex Wilde as a photographer through them. I think,
really,
yeah, I think you've got the standard sort of beetles on a leaf pictures in it. Mm-hmm. You've got beetles in flight, which are sort of reminiscent of the gliding ants, right? Those pictures, and also you can sort of see the influence of other insect photographers in those pictures, like Rick Leader, in the fireflies in flight pictures. And then you've got like your most recent sort of innovations of plate glass, black background pictures in that, which I feel like is a very recent sort of innovation that you've put into your photography. Do you sort of...
I can see what you're saying. It hadn't really occurred to me to look at them that way so much as when I was photographing the fireflies, I wanted to capture a range of the things that they were doing. And that meant using different bits of equipment and different styles. When I first started, I basically had one thing that I did. I had a diffuser to diffuse the light to make it more natural, and then I would just point it at the insect and get everything focused, and blam, and there would be the beetle on the leaf doing its thing. And I have gotten better over the years at thinking about light, and I think that's what's reflected in some of those. I mean, it wasn't a conscious decision to do that, but fireflies, they glow, they produce light. It makes photographing them unlike photographing most other bugs, because you have to take into account not just the light, the ambient light's reflecting off them, but the light that they're producing. And so it is a more advanced subject to photograph.
Mm-hmm. So the photographs you have of the fireflies in flight, you can see sort of their trajectory of their flight through the sort of contrail of light that they leave behind in your photographs. And it seems like there you're sort of, it's a really interesting thing, because you're jumping from just sort of taking a sort of static shot of an insect sort of on a leaf, or, in sort of a portrait thing where you're actually illustrating a behavior, and it's a very interesting thing, because it's
well, you know what it is photographs are two-dimensional. And what I've done is taken a three-dimensional photograph where the third dimension is not the normal third dimension, it's time included in it. And I mean, that sounds all fancy, but that's kind of what I was thinking when I was looking at it, is you figure out how in these photographs to get that element of motion and time. And I think I captured that reasonably well. I did just enough firefly photography this season to realize what the difficulties are, so that next season, if I move beyond just talking about photographing fireflies, I'll actually get out there and do some more of those.
Can you describe what your process of making those shots are? Like when you were getting
the ones in flight,
yeah,
like the close-up ones in flight. Well, I look like an idiot. If you actually were to sit there and watch me, my next door neighbor was sitting on his porch, kind of laughing at me the whole time I was doing this, because I'm literally chasing after the fireflies. I'm not looking through the viewfinder. I have instead set the focus to a particular point and memorized how far in front of the camera the insect has to be focused. And usually if I take a series of 10 shots, I'll get close enough in one of them that the insect will be in focus. The other key element of shooting the fireflies is realizing that they're very predictable. The males of each species have a pattern they follow. In this particular one, the males will do their J-shaped swoop upward. Then they'll hover for a couple seconds.
We have a cat. How you doing?
This is the cat. He's wandering through our interview.
He disagrees with you.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
He would probably like to eat a firefly if he were to catch one. These fireflies do the swoop up, and then they hover predictably for a few seconds, and then they fly down quickly to another spot where they pause for maybe half a second, and then they do their swoop up again. and it's predictable enough that I can try to be in the right place before the beginning of the swoop. And I can only do this early in the evening when there's still enough light where I can visually track them. Then it gets too dark, even though the fireflies are still behaving. But it's predictable enough where I can be in the right place with the camera, but it involves just me running around like mad after them.
Okay, so let's back it up and talk about childhood Alex Wild.
This is deep into the realm of nerddom.
Yeah, there we go. So you're from Rochester, New York?
Yeah, a suburb of Rochester. Yeah.
Right. So as a kid, were you into insects?
Very much so. Some of my earliest memories are of insects. Trying to collect carpenter ants into a styrofoam cup, which sort of encapsulates both my later interests in ants and in collecting things.
Yeah, and I've heard you were a child beekeeper. Is that true?
Yeah, that came a little bit later. I was probably 9 or 10, and I've always been into nature, and in particular, I really liked social insects. One time when I met one of my more distant cousin, a second cousin, she was trying to make small talk with this kid she just met, me, and she asked, so, hey, Alex, what are you into? And I'm sure she was expecting something like, I'm into football or this particular TV show or something. But what I said was, I like colony insects. Because I'd already figured out in my head that what I think I was 8 at the time. What I really liked was insects that live in colonies. I wish I could explain why I like insects that live in colonies, something about their social behavior, the way they interact. I don't know. But I really liked ants and bees. And I'd already been keeping little, ants in jars, but my parents humored me by getting a couple beehives, and my dad and I would go out and tend these things, and my dad would actually do most of the heavy lifting. Turns out there's a lot of lifting in beekeeping.
Yeah. Do you have like a specific moment in your head of like as a kid turning over a log and there was a bunch of ants under it and that was it? Or
well, very early, I remember picking through this rotting stump in Allegheny State Park in New York for carpenter ants. And I also remember, this is home in Rochester, just turning over this rock. I was with my friend Brian, and we saw these bright orange ants, and instantly Brian said, "Oh, look, fire ants," which is, people's reaction to any ant that's not black. These, of course, fire ants don't occur around there. They were actually a root aphid tending species of Lasius. But I remember, collecting these into an ant farm with a bunch of larvae and just sitting there with a magnifying glass, watching the ants feed the larvae and interact with them. And that's kind of seared in my head, this sort of interaction between the ants and their young. I also have wondered, because I spent a lot of time as a kid watching magnified ants, looking at their eyes, watching how they interacted, wondering how much that has made it easier for me later in life, just having these early experiences looking at ants, just as a taxonomist. My formal ant training is as a taxonomist. That's a lot of recognition. Anyway, I could just be making that up. But
no.
I feel like one reason why I'm good as a taxonomist is that I have these ant face recognition skills.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You have the stereotypical story of a child with a magnifying glass looking at ants. I feel like there's some scientists have that and some don't. I mean,
did you have that? Did you?
No. If you could have projected my childhood interests into adult jobs, I would have been a Ninja Turtle scientist. For sure.
There's a big niche for that.
Yeah. Well, they're becoming popular again. So,
I know. I'm just imagining you attaching electrodes to the Ninja Turtles.
Exactly. Yeah, that's even harder to get a job besides ant scientist. It's a Ninja Turtle scientist.
Well, it's because no one's tried.
Yeah, sure. So Did you have other interests as a kid? I've heard inklings
Well,
of.
in high school, I had a long period of being into aviation. I don't know. I really don't know where that came from, other than I liked flying. It seems like a natural kid thing to like flying, like the idea of flying. So I ended up eventually getting a pilot's license. This is with the help of my grandmother, who helped me pay for it. Flying is not
Were other people in your
inexpensive a
family?
thing. No. It was just me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my grandmother, when she was younger, actually did do some flying a long, long time ago.
Oh, wow.
But I don't think that was related to mine. I just happened to like airplanes. And interestingly, my taxonomic instincts developed on insects were very useful for airplanes because, there's all these makes and models, and the skills and being able to see an airplane flying by and identifying, that was a B-25 Mitchell or something. It's the same kind of spatial recognition skills.
Sure.
Uncomplicated, fortunately, by evolution. The biological world is really messy. The aviation world is in comparison quite clean.
Yeah.
Everything made from blueprints.
So high school Alex Wild was flying planes.
High school Alex Wild was flying planes, and interestingly, we lived near a World War II airplane museum. It was a kind of a living history museum where the planes were all actively maintained and flying, which meant that I got to go fly around in an old B-17 bomber or a PBY, or they had a B-25. They had a number of really cool old planes that I got to fly around. And I didn't fly them myself, but I would travel to air shows as a tour guide. It's a lot of fun to fly around in the B-17, which is this classic World War II bomber. It's the one you see in all the posters. It's a really beautiful airplane, and they're really distinct. And there's only about maybe 10 or 15 of these things in the world that still fly. And it's such an instantly recognizable airplane that people who would see us from the ground would pull over in their cars. So we'd be flying somewhere across upstate New York, and you'd just see all the cars pull over to the side of the road.
That's amazing.
As they saw us coming. I mean, I've done that too.
Yeah. In high school and into undergrad, did you ever think that would be sort of a career instead of biology, or were you always sort of that was your first love was insects? And
well, do you see these glasses I'm wearing right here? My vision in the end ended up not being ideal for it. Plus, a lot of pilots have a particular temperament to them, particular characters to them, and I never really quite fit. I think I liked the airplanes in the sort of nerdy taxonomic liking to categorize them type way, and I like the abstract concept of flying. In practice, flying is noisy and smelly, and we're not, when you're up there and planes that aren't the big jetliners, they're bouncing around, and it's not this graceful thing. You're sitting behind this this big vibrating gasoline engine, and it's anything but peaceful.
Yeah.
I mean, now as a biologist, I still love being able to look down at the landscape. It's something you get from that perspective, seeing all the forests and the history of the landscape you can see from the air, which you can't see so much from the ground.
Yeah. So you definitely enjoyed biology more than aviation.
I think it suits me. It suits my personality a bit better.
Yeah.
The two are complementary. There are things you can do with biology and a pilot's license, particularly also, aerial surveys and that sort of thing. Surprising amount of biology you could do from Google Earth. I don't know if you've looked for ant nests in Google Earth, but there are lots of places where you can actually map out the nests of the more conspicuous species, even from satellite photos.
Yeah. Couldn't you collect migrating insects from a plane? Don't they get up that high?
You can, there are people who do that. I wish I could remember their names, but there are people who are doing surveys of the aerial plankton from planes and balloons and that sort of thing.
Well, there's your next photo set. Get up on a plane, insects on the wing in the jet stream.
Yep.
So high school for you, how were you as a student? How did you enjoy school? Were you?
Yes and no. I was a big band geek. That was my other activity. I never really nerded out about music the way I did about planes or ants. But that was my circle of friends. And, I was in the marching band and the jazz band and sometimes in the orchestra and all that. I was an okay high school student. I had a problem with laziness is probably the best way to put it. If I didn't really want to do something, I wouldn't necessarily do it. I'm still that way, but it turns out in high school, they penalize you for that much more than others. So I piddled along in high school and did okay. And through some stroke of luck, I actually made it into a really good college. I ended up going to Bowdoin College. And I suspect I got in because I had such an eccentric and passionate range of interests. So I was kind of one of those unusual people who was liable to do something different. Because it certainly wasn't my grades. I think that got me in. And I had thought, as someone who came through high school just kind of on autopilot, that suddenly into this elite college, I would just really have to work my butt off to just even hang in there. Turns out not at all. It's just that I was much more suited to college, and with the same basic attitude, I ended up doing much better. It was just a different learning environment that suited my, I'm much better at long-term projects, which college has a lot of, rather than these short, having homework due every 2 days kind of thing that you get in high school.
Yeah. Do you think part of it was sort of directing your own studies and choosing your own path more than you could do in high school?
I think that had a lot to do with it. I mean, if you look at my transcript from college, for a while, I was totally an introductory studies major. I mean, I had Asian religions and introductory economics and introductory chemistry, and just, I took kind of introductory everything. But that was great because I could choose. I really enjoyed sort of taking my own interests and doing those.
Yeah. But so you said you think you got in because you had diverse interests and had so many things you were into as a kid. So how did you express that? How did that get you in? How did you express that to the college?
Well, I think it was just my admissions essay was funny. I've always had a sort of artistic side streak. I never say I was very good at it, but I would combine my lack of ability to focus and concentrate on anything with an artistic side streak, and I was always doodling or drawing on the sides of my homework or notes for class or whatever. And I ended up writing that in my application essay. It was talking about what I was drawing and why I was drawing it and the process. And I actually drew in the margins of this essay.
What did you draw?
Well, I had a caricature of George Bush Sr. I had some airplanes, and I think I had a tree or two and maybe a bug. I can't even remember what I drew, but
wow, that's awesome. Do you still have a copy of that?
I bet I do somewhere.
Yeah, that's great.
It's probably not worth anything, but it was a way to demonstrate the interests that I had through a coherent central theme, and that is how I was expressing these interests.
Yeah. So once you were in college, can you sort of nail down any formative like sort of biology or research experience that you had?
Perhaps naively, I never really realized that people could be professional biologists.
Oh, neither did I. I had no idea.
Yeah. It's like it comes as a complete surprise. I have a childhood memory. One of my best friends growing up, his dad worked as an engineer for Kodak, and I remember that his dad had said, "You don't want to be a biologist. There's no jobs in biology," and for some reason that just stuck with me subconsciously, and I never really realized that people would do that kind of thing. And plus, I always associated that running around for bugs is kind of a kid thing, and a lot of people do. So it was a real surprise to me when my introductory ecology professor, Nat Wheelwright, pulled me aside at one point and said, "Hey, you should think about majoring in biology, and we have this and I noticed you really like ants. There's a bunch of ant projects you could do, for a thesis project. And I was just completely floored. This professor I barely knew basically pulled me over and said, "Hey, you should do an undergrad thesis on ants." And I'm like, "People do that?"
Yeah.
Wait, I can get credit for working on ants? Oh, that's amazing.
And how far along in
I was
university?
maybe a sophomore or a junior at that point. Is partway through. Yeah, and so once I realized that you could actually take this fascination with ants and do career-y sort of things with it, then my path was set. Look at my transcript, then it went much towards all the things you need for a biology degree. Statistics and biochemistry and marine biology and all these other things you take at a small college for biology.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what did you do as an undergrad? What was your
I did an
project?
island biogeography project.
Really?
Yeah, which I never published for reasons. I presume we're going to talk about Peace Corps in a bit, but
Yes.
anyway, for reasons of having gone to Peace Corps. Bowdoin College owns an island off the coast of Canada in the Bay of Fundy. This is just up the coast from Maine. And I rowed around a little boat to about 15 little islands in that area and sampled the ants and figured out how many species there were on each island. I knew how big each island was, and I had a sense of the habitat. And so I was able to try to test, for example, the the famous MacArthur-Wilson model of island biogeography. And even though I had long been into ants as a kid, I never really knew much about formally, what they were. I remember, looking at the Audubon Field Guide and trying to identify them as a kid. But actually, this process of doing this as an undergraduate was sitting down with the primary literature and actually learning what makes a myrmica ant a myrmica and all that. It was great. There were 16 species of ants, only 16 species of ants in this archipelago because it's, cold, really, boreal habitat. And it took me 3 months to identify 16 species of ants. I mean, I don't, if I had to try to do the same project, in the Caribbean or in Brazil, I would still be there.
Yeah.
It would literally take me a week of staring at the hairs on the underside of these ants, looking at it from different angles to try to, but the hard work paid off. I took my samples down to, the MCZ ant room. There were no ant researchers at Bowdoin, so my mentors were all at Harvard,
Right.
So I met all the Harvard ant people and
Wilson and
Stephen
Cover.
Stephen and Gary Alpert, and
Nice.
it was Stephen was my early mentor. Was the first person to point out that I was point mounting my ants wrong, and I had gotten nearly 2/3 of my identifications correct my 3 months.
Wow.
Almost a passing grade, maybe, 65%, which apparently is quite good. Ant taxonomy is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Turns out I could have just taken my specimens down there and probably had them all done in 2 days.
Yeah.
But the process of
It's a
trying
process,
to
right?
push through and puzzle it out myself, I think, was very instructive.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Also, sort of telling about what your graduate career would be and sort of what your postdoc would be too.
Yeah. Well, it's been pretty much full on ants ever since.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on this pathway of biology, and you finish your undergrad at Bowdoin, and then you decide to join the Peace Corps.
I did.
Right?
I did. You know why?
Why?
Do you know where Peace Corps works? In the tropics.
Right.
And that meant I found a way to get down to a place that had cool tropical ants. Like, I remember talking to all these people in my cohort, wonderful people, about why everyone was doing it. And people had all these save the world or I want to make a difference. And this, like, I really want to just, there's great ants in the tropics.
Really?
Yeah, I like helping people as much as the next person, I suppose. But,
Yeah.
I had been to Ecuador as an undergrad exchange as part of an undergrad program, and that really opened my eyes, and I've been trying to figure out how to get back to the tropics ever since. I mean, the tropics are just so rich. They've got leafcutter ants and trapjaw ants, and all these army ants and little phenoli. I mean, it's just wonderful. And so my reasons for joining Peace Corps were pretty selfish, and I was surprised as anyone that I did really well at the actual Peace Corps component.
Did you get to pick what you did in Peace Corps?
Well, Peace Corps kind of picked that I had beekeeping experience, and so I was slotted into a beekeeping program, which sent me to Paraguay. So while I didn't really pick, my experiences sort of allowed Peace Corps to pick an appropriate program for me. My technical program was teaching beekeeping, and that turned out to be a lot of fun. I didn't have that much success at that, but you know.
What do you mean?
If you look at the number of people who I actually got started with beekeeping, it's fairly small. I may have made a technical difference in beekeeping skills for 5 or 10 people my whole time there.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I didn't bring running water system to an entire community or, help found a co-op or these other things. I basically just made some farmer friends, and a few of them started keeping bees, and they weren't very good at it.
I see. Yeah. Why were you trying to encourage them to keep bees? For the honey or for the pollination?
Well, the main trouble with the rural economy in a lot of poor countries is reliance on a very small number of cash crops. And this puts the farmers at the mercy of the larger power structures there. They have to rely on the banks to get credit, and they only give out credit for particular crops like cotton and tobacco. And those crops have a lot of middlemen, and it's really easy for the small-scale farmers to end up sort of abused through these monoculturing systems, which really funnel resources towards the wealthier people. And Peace Corps was one of many organizations trying to help farmers find other income streams just to be able to be a little bit more stable. And beekeeping is a really good one, especially in countries where the price of honey is high. And so a beekeeper could, for a fraction the amount of labor, make the same amount of money from 5 beehives, which requires maybe 4 hours of work every 2 weeks, than they could from an entire season of backbreaking physical labor planting cotton. So the numbers all added up. Of course, when I made that spiel to Paraguayans, I had a number of people say, "Oh, that sounds great," because but those people never succeeded at it, because it turns out the secret to being a good beekeeper is not to realize the economic benefits, because then you're doing it for kind of the wrong reasons.
Sure.
The big bee nerds were the ones who succeeded. The people who did really well at beekeeping were the quirky, introverted kind of beekeepery type people. Turns out, internationally, beekeepers are probably pretty similar in a number of ways. So some people did really well at beekeeping, and they were this somewhat more bug nerdy type farmers. And
yeah, I think you wrote on Twitter a couple weeks ago or last week that joining the Peace Corps was one of the best decisions you made.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
It sort of affects what you do just in normal life. Like how does it do that? Why? What did you? What was the most that you got out of it?
Well, there's several levels of why the experience was so good. And at the most basic level, the most superficial level, I learned how to speak Spanish and Guarani, which is an indigenous language, picked up a little Portuguese. I learned how to travel in Latin America comfortably. I learned how better to work within the culture. And that was really valuable in all my subsequent research, where I'd travel around. I'd have a much better sense of how to get things done, how to work the permit process, how to collaborate with host country counterparts. Just logistically, it made it easier. But, there were on other levels, there were just all sorts of things about the human condition. I spent months trying to get proficient enough at speaking Guarani to have basic conversations with these subsistence farmers I was living with. And then just to see that, basically, I've mastered this ancient indigenous language of Guarani, but really, and then you figure out they're just talking about soccer and making penis-sized jokes. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, you know, people are people. And I know you can think about that and say, yeah, people are people, and adopt that as a slogan, but so living it is kind of a different matter. I just was much more comfortable as a citizen of the world, having done something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And throughout this, did you ever have a change of heart where, like, maybe I should do something other than ant science or other than, you know, biology in general?
Oh, all the time. I learned that I really liked my independence, and I didn't really like working for people. I kind of knew that before, but I think that was instrumental in my decision to leave the tenure track and go more off on the photography business, is having seen, you know, in Peace Corps, when you leave the university environment and then you see the diversity in which other people live, everything from, you know, people working for the Paraguayan government doing ag extension, to small business people, to farmers, and see everyone living their lives in this sort of full scope of doing things, you really realize that there are way more possibilities out there than what you see as a university student, when your only role models are your TAs and your professors, and maybe, you know, what your siblings do when you see them and go home. You know, when you're pulled out of your little cocoon and forced out into the world, you often get a better sense of the many different ways you can make a living. And I think that made me much less stressed about having to stay on the tenure track, and much more comfortable with the notion of, oh, you know, I like bugs, but, you know, there are other things you can do with bugs.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Now I can see how it sort of influences your decision making and sort of your approach to things, but sort of taking that step outside of what you're used to.
Yeah, it makes me a little more, I mean, I'm not a risk taker really, but it makes me more comfortable with risk.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So, I want to get back to, well, eventually I want to hit on the transition from academia to full-time on your own independent sort of biologist photographer, but there's several steps to get to that, I think. So you're 3 years into the Peace Corps and you decide to apply for grad school in the U.S.
Yes, and that was not a career decision. That was, you know, the wealthiest I've ever felt in my life was when I was making $200 a month in Peace Corps, because, you know, my neighbors who had 11 kids only made $400 a year. Mm-hmm. And I was, you know...
11 kids?
Yeah, 11 kids. And, I mean, subsistence farmer. I mean, they grew their own food, and that was pretty amazing to see how people managed to pull that off.
Yeah.
And, you know, and here I was this, you know, rich kid from North America. Mm-hmm. Showed up to supposedly help these people. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
They helped me survive. I mean, I amused them briefly and taught them a couple things about bees, but yeah, most of the learning was the other way.
Yeah.
Where was I going with this?
Applying to grad school.
Yeah, applying to grad school. So Peace Corps was this real eye-opening experience where, you know, where you learn to value things for experience by themselves. You do things not because they're a means to an end, but because you just think they would be a good thing to do. And I applied to graduate school mostly because I thought it would be cool to have a PhD in ants.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
I loved ants. I wanted to just be a little bit more formal. I didn't necessarily want to do anything in particular with my life at that point, but having, you know, lived in this subsistence community, you know, collecting ants during my spare time, you know, this huge pile of specimens, and I just wanted to get better at processing these specimens and get better at seeing how they fit in and learning some larger, more scientific or philosophical context for these bugs that were in these little jars that I had. And a PhD would be great for that. And I went about applying to grad school entirely the wrong way, which wasn't really my fault. This was in the late 90s. There wasn't much in the way of internet. I mean, the internet happened when I was away. You know, I left in 95, and there was Gopher and a few things. And I imagine, I got back in 99, and suddenly everything was a .com, and there were these web browsers. And I didn't know. I mean, it was a changed world. But applying to graduate school remotely it was hard. And so I randomly picked one school to apply to.
What was that?
Stanford.
Okay.
To work with Deborah Gordon.
Sure.
I'm not sure why I picked Stanford. I had liked some of Deborah's work, and I think I cited a bit of her stuff in my my undergrad, some of my undergrad thesis work. But that turns out, I'm really a taxonomist at heart, and Stanford is not really the ideal place. And when I got flown out for an interview by surprise, I got this interview announcement. I was vacationing in Brazil after Peace Corps. I hadn't really been back to the States. And next thing I know, I'm standing in these air-conditioned halls with all these people who are earnestly debating the adaptiveness of phenotypic plasticity. And I was used to having finally figured out how to talk about soccer and penis size and Guarani. That was my level of discourse.
Sure.
And I did not fit in. I was meeting with all these really famous scientists, and I was so out of my depth, and I was having a great time. I had a number of really just candid chats with the Stanford faculty, and I wasn't admitted. But one valuable thing is everyone I talked to there who's in the know about ants said, you need to be at UC Davis working with Phil Ward.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone's like, oh, given your interest, you really should just be up at Davis. And so then, I went home and I went to visit some friends of mine at Cornell and walked around the Cornell campus. And everyone I talked to there said, oh, you really should be working with Phil Ward at UC Davis. I'm starting to get this idea that I should work with Phil Ward at UC Davis. I'd only been home for like 2-3 weeks. It was massive culture shock, and just, and I was still in that, living in the South American campo in my head of just, making random decisions and doing whatever without much of a plan. But anyway, I called up Phil and I said, hey, and I'd corresponded with Phil over the years about other things. And I said, hey, Phil, can I be in your lab? And he said, usually people fill out an application form and go through all that. I'm like, okay, yeah, and I'd missed the deadline. But he was gracious enough to offer me a desk in his lab because I had boxes of Paraguayan, unsorted Paraguayan ants to work through. And so I love my parents, but I was at this point ready to move out of the house.
Sure.
And so I just bought a plane ticket to California, showed up with a suitcase. I'm like, hey, Phil, I'm here, got my ants. And it just so happened that the Department of Entomology had admitted a student from out of state who decided not to attend.
Uh-huh.
And so there's this pile of money that was allocated for this person. Still don't know who it was. And they had me quickly fill out an application form. I was kind of retroactively admitted.
Yeah.
And this is mostly due to the fact that I was used to working as I did in Peace Corps, just sort of doing what I wanted and announcing to people what I wanted to do, and it would just sort of happen. And it's very much happened that way in graduate school. I was just kind of pushy. And I ended up in Phil's lab, and it's a great fit. I had a tremendous time. I learned a lot. Phil is so knowledgeable about ants and systematics, and so I really matured in my thinking about evolution and just entomology in general. I didn't feel like an entomologist until I went to UC Davis. I just felt like a guy who really liked bugs.
In grad school, I think that's where your photography starts to take off.
Yes.
Because as an undergrad, I obsessively read your 2003 Notes from the Underground article about.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was like an instructional article about macro photography and photography of ants.
I had a lot of hubris to write that article at the time because I had been photographing for maybe a year or 2 years at that point. I still had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, right. That was early on. Well, but yeah, you had basically the skeleton of your current setup, basically.
Yeah, my basic get the flash diffused and pointed at the bug. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I read that a lot, and in retrospect, I didn't. It's sort of interesting to think about because you were a grad student during that time when you wrote that, and a lot of people, when they're thinking about photography and their research or in what they do, they get to the step of taking decent pictures, putting them in presentations and things like that, which I feel like is the point and shoot sort of cool pics that you had.
That's why I started. I wanted photos for presentations. I wanted to put a photo of an ant on my webpage.
But then you as a grad student invest in $2,000 worth of photography gear. You make that jump. Like what inspired you to make that jump? Why did you think that you could do it? And what did you want to get out of it? And
I mean, it was a big jump. And in hindsight, it wasn't that big of a risk. But I'm still at the time I was still in my, I'm wealthy. I'm making $200 a month, from Peace Corps stage. From that perspective, spending that amount of money was a lot. I had an NSF pre-doc, which meant that I had some extra money if I saved up. I put a little bit on the credit card. But mostly what it was is I had become just proficient enough with my Nikon Coolpix Digicam to know what its limitations were, and I'd already had an idea of what sort of photos I wanted to take, and I did a lot of research to figure out exactly what gear I needed to take the photos I wanted to take. And the biggest limitation was the lighting. Yeah. I just could not, with that little flash stuck on the camera, the little Coolpix flash, I could not have any control over how the light looked. And that's such an important part of photography is light. I mean, you're capturing photons. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And so I bought what I had to buy to have a system that I could control light. If I was a little more inventive, I could have done what my friend Thomas Shahan does, which is look for things at garage sales and piece things together. And
sure.
I wasn't that adventurous or confident enough about my tech skills. So I took the risk, and no one was more surprised than I was that it paid for itself, within a year or two.
One question that I wanted to ask you is, I know as a researcher and as sort of a student and investing, 5 or 6 years of your life in grad school just to research ants or insects, I would get a question about, why are you doing this? Why are you studying ants? So I'm assuming you also got that question.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah. But once you transitioned into taking photographs of ants and sort of transitioned into a full-time career of that, I wonder if the question is, if you hear it less. Do you hear it less as a photographer? Do you hear
I hear it a
why
lot
insects
less.
why ants?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. And we're visual creatures. And when I show someone a picture of an ant that I've taken, I think that makes much more sense to them why I do that than were I to try to explain to them why figuring out the phylogeny of dolichoderine ants is central to such and such. It just photographs have impact. Imagine if I did video.
Yeah. So do you think your photographs have more impact than your scientific research?
Oh, absolutely. Who knows? Whoever cites my papers. I mean, really, like I do research. I think it's solid research, but there's a lot of people who do really great ant research. I'm not by any means a great scientist. And but everyone knows my photographs. I remember going to a conference several years ago, and I was still primarily doing research, and I introduced myself to someone, and she said, "Oh, you're Alex Watt, like the photographer?" I'm like, "No, that's me. I am a photographer." It sort of clicked that at the time, it's like, wow, people only know me for the photography. And, then it becomes kind of a positive reinforcement feedback loop.
Do you think that? Do you think that your photography has more impact than the research you would potentially be doing?
Yes, I reach a lot more people with images. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I could go back more into research and we'll discover the cure for cancer or something cliched like that somehow by the phylogeny of Sema pelta or something. Who knows? It would be a mistake to kind of like compartmentalize those things, though, because there's a comment on. I had a bunch of photos in Huffington Post the other day, and there was a comment that one of the readers left that on the surface you'd think might make me angry, but it was actually a comment I quite liked. A guy had said, "What's really so special about these photos? I mean, we can just go and watch BBC's like high definition video. I mean, that's way better than this. Why does this guy get so much publicity?" And I'm like, fair enough. Leaving aside the issue of video and still, there's a lot of photographers out there who are a lot more talented than I am. But I know what I'm shooting and I know why I'm shooting it. And that's because I'm primarily a natural historian and I'm primarily into ants. Even if you take a really skilled photographer out in the field and say, hey, why don't you go shoot right to the opponent of Victoriae doing such and such behavior, they're going to be lost, and what I have is the technical knowledge, enough technical knowledge of ants and enough skill with photography to be able to find the middle path there. And the real value in what I do has to do with the illustration of the technical knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. Is there do you, as a full-time photographer now, do you miss any of the research? Like, what are there aspects of it that you wish were?
You know what I mean? I miss a few things. I miss these sort of group field trips we take with other biologists, and I miss the sudden emergence of pattern from data. You spend a lot of time generating all these numbers, and then that magic moment where it spits out this little bit of truth.
Sure. Yeah.
That discovery is pretty thrilling. And I still do some. I got a couple. That reminds me, I have a paper I have to submit by Monday. It's almost done, but I still do some of that. But there's a lot about science that I like.
Yeah. Do you find the feeling of discovery in photography? I mean, it seems to me like a lot of your things are picturing things that haven't been pictured. Like you post several pictures of this ant has never been photographed before. Here it is for everybody to see. And it seems like, I mean, even with your firefly things, like I've never seen pictures like that of an individual illustrating a streak, what sort of their flight pattern is in a photograph. I feel like there's some discovery in that. Do you feel like
is there discovery? Yeah, but a photograph is an anecdote. I think that's the issue. Is I try not to have any pretensions about my photographs revealing much truth about the world. I mean, they can capture a slice of time, but it's really easy to manipulate, even subconsciously, what that slice of time shows. There still isn't a substitute for properly formulating a hypothesis and trying to reject it and trying to test it with data. A photograph can spark the imagination. It can help to illustrate something. If I know a phenomenon exists because someone's done research on it, I can try to photograph that. But it's really easy to manufacture a phenomenon. It's harder to do that with video. I mean, I'm not saying I consciously fabricate things in the photos, but the process of taking them, I'll be out there in the field, I'll see something, I'll take 100 photos, and one of them looks really nice, so I'll use that one. But I'm throwing away data, and I'm throwing away data really selectively. And I feel like that introduces enough bias where you want to be really careful about what you think you're taking away from my images. I'm much more comfortable with the idea of people looking at my images and thinking, oh, that's really cool, maybe I want to learn more, rather than taking my image and saying, aha, look, this is an image of, this is what happens.
Yeah. Has that ever happened? Has someone looked at your photographs and said, wow, this is really cool, I want to know more, and then done research off of it? You think you've inspired that? Because I know you used to blog like things that you'd see in the field and say this would be a really good project for someone to work on. I don't think you do it as much as anymore, but a couple of years ago,
I went through a phase of.
It seems like in Arizona there was a few instances of that. Like, I'm in the field, I see this. It's really cool.
I went into the field a lot more in Arizona was one thing. And I was living in a place that was less explored than here. I wonder if that's good. I hadn't thought about that pattern, but has someone taken something of my photographs and done more? I don't really know. If someone has, could they please call in? Tell them something has been useful that has cropped up.
Well,
I've gotten a paper out of things. Like I found this kleptoparasitic fly in South Africa that was stealing food from the ants. So I ended up collaborating with a fly systematist in London. We wrote this paper about what it was doing. But that's me inspiring my own work. I don't know if that's the same.
Well, but was that project based on photographs?
Once I realized I was seeing something interesting, I took enough photographs to try to capture the full range of the behavior as I saw it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That seems like full circle. That seems like research through photography.
Yeah. Right? If I was Tom Eisner, I then would have followed up on some chemical signaling that was going on too and gotten a Nature paper. But instead, we're in the Journal of African Invertebrates or something like that. Yeah.
Well. It's a paper's a paper. Impact is subjective, I think. Yeah. Who knows? So now you're basically a full-time photography business, and one of the things that you started doing is sort of training people, giving away your secrets by having photography shops. What is your approach to that? Like, do you feel like you're giving away your secrets? Do you feel like you're empowering the next?
I don't have secrets. I didn't invent anything. I figured out how to do what I do by snooping around online and just trying to reverse engineer stuff. There's so much information out there that people who want to learn how to do this are going to figure it out one way or another. There's just so much information available. And we insect photographers, we're not competitors, really. We're not, maybe in a short-term sense, there's a magazine looking for an image and it's me or the other guy. Yeah. But really what we're faced with is a broader culture that doesn't think very much about nature. And I think photographers sticking together, scientists sticking together, people who like natural history sticking together are much better served by elevating the profile of natural history as a whole than squabbling amongst ourselves over who gets to be the alpha photographer or this or that. The fact is we're a really tiny, small sliver of what's possible. And if we can, and if more people are taking better looking photographs of bugs, that helps all of us, I think. And so I've never really seen it as giving away my secrets. I don't really have secrets. and the more people learn how to take better bug photos, the more better bug photos I'll get to look at. And that's a good thing. Yeah.
All right. So I'll end on this. Are there any sort of elusive shots that are out there that you have your head set on getting, or that are sort of goals that you want to
what I've got is a lot of photos that I took a few years ago that I know I can do better now.
Oh, yeah?
Joe's going to hate me for this because she spent an entire morning bending over and picking up a gliding ant. I have this photo of a gliding ant.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We had the timing all done. I have a much better sense of timing and composition. I have some better lenses, and all this practice with the fireflies, getting things in motion, I have a better sense of what to do with a flash. I could really do a better gliding ant photo now than I could at the time. But I'd still probably need Joe to sit there and drop the ant for me. And that's the real hard work with that one. I don't know. I used to say, I'd love to do the fireflies, but I've done those.
Yeah,
so
sure.
You can come up with something else.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. That gliding ants 2.0. I'll look for that blog post. Definitely. Yep. Well, thanks for talking to me. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah.